That night, as she prayed, the presence of Ekabasi filled the room once again, stronger than ever. But this time, Ijeoma was no longer afraid. She was angry. "I reject you," she shouted, her voice shaking with power. "I reject your lies." The room trembled, and the presence seemed to push against her, but Ijeoma stood firm. Her heart burned with a fierce determination. She had been deceived, but now she wanted to fight back. The days that followed were the hardest for Ijeoma. The weight of the truth settled heavily on her heart. Ekabasi's presence had never been so strong, its whispers now a constant hum in her mind. Every time she prayed, the spirit tried to drown her, pushing her to prophesy, to speak, to use the power she had come to believe was a gift from God. But now, every word was like a lie to her. Every prophecy felt like a chain pulling her further into darkness. "I reject you," Ijeoma thundered every night, her voice trembling but steady. "You will not control me." But the spirit would not let her go so easily. Each time she resisted, it grew angrier. The whispers became louder, more demanding. "You are mine, Ijeoma," it would hiss. "You belong to me." One morning, as she sat by Emeka's bed, her hands resting on his limp body, she felt a cold wave of hopelessness. She had prayed so long for his healing, but there was no change. The sickness that had taken her son seemed to have a grip on him that nothing could break. The thought of losing him, after everything, made her heart ache. But something had shifted within her. The spirit had taken so much from her already. Her peace. Her family. And now it was trying to take her son. "I won't let you," Ijeoma muttered under her breath, her voice filled with a quiet strength she hadn't known she still had. That night, as she prayed alone in her room, the air was so thick, heavy with the oppressive presence of Ekabasi. The spirit seemed to be everywhere, suffocating her. The voices grew louder, the power more demanding. "You cannot win," the voice mocked. "You are nothing without me." But Ijeoma was tired. Tired of being controlled. Tired of being afraid. "Leave me," she screamed, her voice rising with a power she hadn't known she possessed. "I reject you. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave." For a moment, there was silence, an intense, unsettling stillness. And then, with a force that knocked her to the ground, the room exploded with energy. The walls shook, the air crackled with electricity, and Ijeoma's heart pounded in her chest. The spirit fought back, its anger seeping into the room like poison. But Ijeoma held on. "I will not be your puppet," she whispered, her breath ragged. "I will be free." The struggle felt endless, as though the very air was fighting against her, but Ijeoma refused to back down. She felt the spirit's hold begin to loosen, the power it had held over her starting to fade. With each prayer, each desperate plea, she felt the chains fall away, piece by piece. And then, with a final cry, she felt the presence of Ekabasi vanish, as though it had never been there. Ijeoma fell to the floor, exhausted, her body trembling. The room was still, the oppressive weight gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace. But as the silence settled, a thought struck her, sharp and painful. "Emeka." She rushed to her son's side, hoping against hope that somehow, her prayers had worked. But when she looked at him, lying there motionless, her heart sank. He was gone. Ijeoma sat motionless by Emeka's side, her hands trembling as they rested on his cold, lifeless body. The reality of what had just happened hit her like a heavy stone. She had fought so hard, so desperately to free herself from Ekabasi's grip, but at what cost? Emeka was gone, and she could feel the gaping hole in her heart. Her mind raced with thoughts, questions she couldn't answer. Was it her fault? Had she been so focused on her own battle that she hadn't seen the damage it was causing to her son? All the while, she had believed the power she wielded was from God, and yet, now that same power had failed her in her darkest hour. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Emeka, her only child. The boy she had carried for months, loved and cared for, only to lose him to something she didn't even understand fully. Her body shook with grief, but deep inside, a part of her was still fighting. She had given everything to God. She had fought to keep her faith, to hold on to hope. But now she doesn't know where to turn. Chijioke, her husband, hadn't been of much help. Their marriage had been a fragile thing for months, and now, with the loss of Emika, it seemed as though the final thread that held them together had snapped. He had distanced himself even further, his eyes filled with anger and sorrow, but mostly with blame. Every time he looked at her, Ijeoma felt the weight of his judgment. "I have failed," she whispered through her tears. "I have failed you, Emika." The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Ijeoma looked up, startled. It was Chijioke. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes distant. "But I've been praying," he said quietly, his voice strained. "But nothing's changing. You keep saying you can heal him, but—" "I know," Ijeoma interrupted, her voice breaking. "I know, Chijioke. I tried. I thought the power I had was from God. But now I know the truth." Chijioke didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his face unreadable. For a long time, they both stood there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them like a heavy fog. Ijeoma closed her eyes, the guilt crushing her from within. How could she have been so blind? The spirit that had led her so far, had it truly been from God? Or had she been deceived all along? As the days passed, Ijeoma's grief didn't ease. Every corner of the house reminded her of Emika, every quiet moment a painful reminder of the son she had lost. And in her mind, the voice of Ekabasi still lingered, as though it were watching her, waiting for her to give in again. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. She had learned the hard way that there were no shortcuts in life, no easy paths to redemption. The cost of her gift, her power, had been too great. And now, with the loss of her son, she has lost everything. Even when she was sad, a little bit of courage started to grow in her heart. She couldn't undo the past, but she could choose what came next. She couldn't bring Emika back, but she could fight for her life, her soul. She could rebuild, even if it took everything she had. "I will find a way," Ijeoma whispered to herself, wiping the tears from her face. "I will not be the woman I was before. I will be free." Ijeoma's world had crumbled. Emika was gone. The guilt that had weighed heavily on her heart from the moment the spirit had first touched her had now consumed her completely. She had been a woman of strong faith, a prayer warrior in her church, yet in the end, her power had betrayed her. The parable her grandmother used to tell echoed in her mind. A bird that flies too close to the fire will burn its wings. Had she flown too close to the fire? Had her desire for spiritual strength blinded her to the dangers that came with it? Ijeoma had never sought the power that had come upon her. She had only sought to grow closer to God, to speak in tongues, connect with the divine. But in her prayer room, while practicing her prayers, something had happened. She had felt it, the power that filled her. She had felt the voice, the overwhelming presence that had first whispered her name, claiming to be the Holy Spirit. She thought it was a gift, a blessing. But in the end, it was a curse. "I should have known," Ijeoma whispered, her voice breaking as she sat by Emika's bed. The same bed that had once held her son's fragile body, now cold and empty. The days following Emika's death were filled with silence. Chijioke had withdrawn into his own grief, no longer the husband she had known. Their home, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on her. The void left by her son's death was unbearable. But what hurt more was knowing that the power she had embraced had brought nothing but destruction. The voice of Ekabasi, the spirit that had controlled her, still lingered, haunting her every thought. It whispered to her from the corners of her mind, reminding her of the promises it had made, promises of power, of greatness. But now, those promises felt hollow. She had lost everything, her son, her marriage, her peace. "I should have been stronger," Ijeoma muttered, her voice barely audible. The regret lingered at her heart, but she refused to let it consume her. She couldn't undo the past. She could only face the truth now, even if it meant walking alone. One night, as she sat by the window, gazing at the dark sky, a thought struck her. What if I can still make things right? She had lost her son, yes, but there was still hope. She could still rebuild, even if the road ahead was long and uncertain. The first step would be confronting the truth, facing the spirit that had deceived her, and casting it out once and for all. Ijeoma stood up, her heart heavy but resolute. It was time to take control of her life again. As she knelt to pray, the familiar presence filled the room. She felt it before she even closed her eyes, the cold, suffocating power of Ekabasi. But this time, Ijeoma was not afraid. She was no longer the woman she had been. She was stronger now, filled with a new sense of purpose. "I reject you," she whispered, her voice steady. "You have no power over me anymore." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with tension. The whispers of Ekabasi filled her ears, urging her to give in, to surrender once more. But Ijeoma stood firm, her hands clenched into fists. "You will leave me," she commanded, her voice rising. "I am not yours to control." Suddenly, the room trembled. The power within her surged, and she felt a violent force push against her, as though the spirit was trying to hold on. But Ijeoma's will was stronger. The spirit had already taken too much from her. She would not let it take any more. "I cast you out of my life," she shouted, her voice filled with a power she had never known before. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the oppressive presence began to fade, the air in the room slowly returning to normal. Ijeoma opened her eyes, breathless but victorious. The spirit was gone. But even in the silence, there was a weight on her heart. She had won, yes, but at what cost? Her son was still gone, her marriage still broken. The road to redemption would not be easy. And yet, Ijeoma knew she had taken the first step. She had reclaimed her soul. Now it was time to rebuild. The silence that followed the expulsion of Ekabasi from her life felt strange. Ijeoma stood alone in the room, the weight of her actions and decisions bearing down on her like a heavy storm cloud. But there was no fear now, only a quiet resolve. The power that had once consumed her was gone, but so much had been lost along the way. Ijeoma sat on the floor, tears running down her face as she remembered her son. "Emeka," she cried, "my boy." There would be no coming back from his death. Nothing she did could undo the hurt, the pain. But she was not ready to let the past define her. There was still time to rebuild, to heal, and to make amends. In the village, people still spoke of her prophecies. Many praised her for the miracles she had brought into their lives, but Ijeoma no longer felt the joy in hearing their gratitude. Her power had been a gift, yes, but it had come with too high a price. She thought of the parable her grandmother used to tell. A cow that does not know its own strength will trample the farmer's crops. Ijeoma had been that cow. She had not known the true weight of her power, and it had trampled the very things she cherished. But now she understood. The strength that she had sought was never meant for personal gain. It was meant to be shared, to help others in their time of need. But she had been blind to that truth. As the days passed, Ijeoma took small steps to reclaim her life. She started by visiting the families she had helped through her prophecies. She apologized to them, telling them that the gift she had shared with them had not come from God, but from something far darker. Many of them understood and forgave her, but others turned away, hurt by her words. Chijioke, too, remained distant. He had not spoken to her since Emeka's death, and though Ijeoma longed for his comfort, she knew the damage to their marriage was beyond repair. Still, she refused to give up. She knew that reconciliation would take time, and that, like healing a wound, it could not be rushed. One evening, as she sat by the fire, an elder in the village came to her. His name was Okoro. Okoro was a wise man who had lived through many storms and seen the twists of fate that came with time. He had always been a quiet observer of Ijeoma's journey, watching her with the kind of understanding only a truly wise person could have. "You have suffered much, Ijeoma," he said softly as he sat beside her. "The path you walked was not an easy one. But I want you to remember that there is wisdom in every step we take, even in our mistakes." Ijeoma looked at him, her heart aching. "But the mistakes cost me everything, Okoro. I lost my son. I lost my family. I lost myself." Okoro nodded, his face solemn. "Yes, but there is also wisdom in the pain. You have learned what you needed to learn. The power you sought has brought destruction, yes, but it has also taught you the value of humility. It taught you to rely on something greater than yourself." Ijeoma sat in silence, letting his words wash over her. In the quiet of that moment, she realized the truth of his words. The power she had sought was never meant for her to control. It was meant to be a tool for service, for the greater good. And now, she has learned that lesson the hard way. Okoro smiled gently, his eyes twinkling with the kind of wisdom only age could bring. "The lion that roars the loudest often walks alone," he said, quoting an old proverb. "But the lion that knows when to be silent is the one that leads the pride." Ijeoma's heart stirred as she absorbed his words. She had roared with the power she had been given, but it had only led to isolation and pain. Now, she understood that true strength came not from dominance, but from understanding, humility, and the willingness to serve others. The next day, Ijeoma went to the river, a place she had always found peace. As she knelt by the water, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. She prayed for forgiveness, for herself, for her son, for her husband. She prayed for the strength to move forward, to rebuild her life with purpose and grace. As she stood up, the sun began to set behind the hills, casting a golden light over the water. The world seemed to hold its breath at that moment, and for the first time in a long time, Ijeoma felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would not be easy, but she knew it was the only road she could walk. She had lost much, but she had learned to find strength in the things that truly mattered: love, humility, and the will to change. Ijeoma couldn't shake the thought that the storm she had faced was not over. The spirit of Ekabasi, though seemingly gone, still lingered in her mind, like a shadow she couldn't escape. She found herself drifting through the motions of life, her mind filled with questions. What had truly happened to her? Why had this power come upon her in the first place? And why had it taken so much from her, her son, her peace, her marriage? One evening, Ijeoma walked through the village market. The usual sounds of laughter and chatter filled the air, but Ijeoma felt disconnected, like a stranger in her own world. She wasn't sure if the people knew what had happened to her, but she felt their eyes upon her, and it made her uncomfortable. As she turned a corner, she saw him, the man in white. He was standing by the river, looking out over the water as though waiting for something. When their eyes met, Ijeoma felt a chill run through her. He was the same man who had spoken to her at the church. His presence was unsettling, but she couldn't avoid him. "Ijeoma," he said calmly, "the time has come for you to understand." Ijeoma took a step back, her heart beating faster. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You were chosen for this path, but the choice to walk it was yours," the man replied, his gaze never leaving her. "The power you sought was not given freely. You have suffered, but you have also learned. Now you must face what you have lost." Ijeoma swallowed hard. "I lost my son," she whispered. "I lost my family. I lost myself." The man nodded. "Yes. But you also have the power to rebuild what has been broken. You must first reconcile with the one person you've left behind, the one who still stands by you." Ijeoma's eyes widened. She knew exactly who he meant. Chijiok, her husband, the one she had pushed away in the chaos of her spiritual journey. She hadn't seen him truly for so long, not since Emika's death, and their marriage had been hanging by a thread. "You must go to him, Ijeoma. You must make things right before you can move forward." The words hit her like a wave. For the first time, she realized that her journey had not just been about spiritual power. It had been about healing the broken relationships in her life, especially with the one man who had stood by her side through it all. That night, Ijeoma sat in her room, the weight of the man's words heavy on her heart. She had ignored Chijiok's pain for so long, lost in her own battle with the spirit that had taken control of her. Now, as the days went by and the silence between them grew louder, she knew it was time to act. The next morning, she found Chijiok sitting outside, his face tired and worn, as though the weight of everything had aged him. He looked up when she approached, his eyes distant, but there was no anger there. Just sorrow. "Ijeoma," he said quietly, his voice low. "I've been waiting for you to come back. I didn't know if you ever would." Ijeoma sat down beside him, her heart aching. "I've made so many mistakes, Chijiok," she said softly. "I thought I was doing God's work, but I was lost. I hurt you, I hurt us." Chijioke didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. But then, after a long silence, he finally spoke. "I know you've been through a lot," he said. "But you weren't the only one hurting, Ijeoma. I watched as you lost yourself to something that wasn't real. And I couldn't help you. I didn't know how to." The pain in his voice was clear, and Ijeoma could feel the weight of the years they had spent apart. But now, as they sat together, she realized that their journey didn't have to end in sorrow. They could rebuild. They could start again. "I'm sorry, Chijioke," she whispered. "I was so focused on my own pain, I didn't see yours. I was lost in the power, but now I know that the true power lies in love, in forgiveness, and in understanding." Chijioke's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Ijeoma," he said gently, "we've both made mistakes. But we can start again. We can rebuild together." Ijeoma felt a tear slip down her cheek as she took his hand. In that moment, she realized that the true healing was not in the power she had sought, but in the love she had nearly lost. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer one of separation, but one of understanding. As Ijeoma and Chijioke sat together, the sun beginning to set on their village, Ijeoma felt the weight of her journey finally begin to lift. She had learned that true strength did not come from power, but from humility. The road to healing was not easy, but it was always worth it. In her journey, Ijeoma learned that sometimes we seek things that seem good but lead us down the wrong path. But even when we lose our way, there is always hope for redemption. True strength comes not from what we can control, but from what we can forgive and rebuild. And as she looked at her husband, Ijeoma knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would both learn to walk together in faith, no longer lost, but found.
The end. In this powerful African tale, Ijeoma's journey teaches us profound lessons about the complexities of faith, the dangers of seeking power without understanding the source, and the transformative power of humility and love. Her quest for spiritual strength led her down a dark path, but through self-awareness, acceptance, and reconciliation, she ultimately learns that true strength lies not in control but in love, forgiveness, and rebuilding broken relationships. This story reminds us that even in the face of our losses and hardship, there is always hope for redemption, and healing begins with humility and the courage to make things right. If you found this video inspiring, please like, share, and comment below with your thoughts on Ijeoma's journey. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, uplift, and challenge us to grow together. Bye, and stay safe.